Madam Speaker. You know, Ontario is subsidizing renewable energy and then selling it. They have to buy it. There's nothing in there to protect those people in Ontario from having to buy that energy that's subsidized, and then they have to turn around and sell it at a loss when they don't need it. So, Madam Speaker, this government, with respect to its renewable energy, we've seen carbon emissions actually rise. And, Madam Speaker, it's not achieving anything for the environment, but sadly it's also not achieving anything as far as cost goes, because we see the cost is rising. And we see from recent statements made by the CEO of Emera that Churchill Falls is going to increase the cost of energy by 2 to 3% per year, and it's only representing about 7.5% of the actual energy inputs. If it represented 100%, we'd be looking at 26 to 36% increases per year. Madam Speaker, that is a lot. That's a huge increase. Why would we want to choose that route? Maybe there are other ways that we can improve or reduce our carbon footprint. Maybe there are, and maybe they're cheaper. Why not support this bill? Why not have some vision, Madam Speaker? Support this bill to make sure that we make good decisions for Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable House Leader for the Progressive Conservative Party. Well,
listen, we try to aim to please here on some great debate. There was some great debate, and I want to thank everybody for that. If I thought I had a little more time, I would call speech and reply, but I'm not going to do it tonight. In full respect for what's going on this evening down in the foyer with the Arthritis Society. So don't forget, everybody, you're more than welcome downstairs. With that, I say that's opposition business for today, and I pass the baton over to the Government House Leader.
Recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I ask that the House do rise to meet again tomorrow at the hour of 12 noon, with the House hours to be from noon to 6 p.m. Following daily routine, the government will call Bill number 160 for second reading, Bill number 94 for third reading, Bills 155, 156, 157, Committee of the Whole House, and Madam Speaker, the government will also be asking for unanimous consent to move several government bills through remaining stages. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The motion is that we do now rise to meet again tomorrow, Thursday, December the 6th, between the hours of 12 noon and 6 p.m. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We have reached the moment of interruption. I now call adjournment motion under Rule 5.5, the late debate topic as submitted by the member for Kings North. Therefore, which reads, therefore, be it resolved that Nova Scotians could expect far fewer jobs and investments, lower property values, and less opportunity for young people if Liberals had their way, because Liberals would let Vancouver or Quebec win decades of defence shipbuilding work rather than invest so that the ships start here. I now recognize the honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to stand tonight to say a few words that flow from the resolution. I know that to build a better future for Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker, we need to do things differently. We need to take our province in a new direction. And I think the resolution that I put forward, Madam Speaker, suggests in general terms, or maybe in some particular terms, that the Liberals criticize, but don't really offer many solutions. Well, they do, of course, offer those worn old chestnuts that suggest that lower taxes or letting the private sector take charge of our economy will lead to better things. But I think, Madam Speaker, that kind of magical thinking really doesn't get us far. And sometimes I wish that people would stop using those directions and at least begin to point, if they could, to some of those jurisdictions where ideas like that work. I don't think they'll find them. But mind you, Madam Speaker, we do have some troubles here in Nova Scotia. There's no doubt that we still have our fair share of challenges. And none of this is new, Madam Speaker. I was thinking as I wrote those words about rural depopulation. It's something that we're faced with in this province and that we've been faced with for a long time. And it so happens that at the moment I'm reading a biography on the political thoughts of J.S. Woodsworth, the founder of our political party, who in, I think it was 1913, was describing the effect of rural depopulation on Canada, and on Eastern Canada in particular. So it's nothing new, Madam Speaker. We've had our economic difficulties here for many years as well, for decades, for more than a century, Madam Speaker. We've had too few jobs, and we've had wages that aren't competitive with other parts of North America. And as I've said in this House before, Madam Speaker, my colleague from Colchester Musquodoboit Valley has written a book called Away, in which he describes the kind of solution, one of the solutions that Nova Scotians have used for many, many years to deal with economic hardships, and that's to go somewhere else. My colleague here in the legislature has described people who've gone to Massachusetts, who've gone to Ontario, who've gone to Alberta. And there's no doubt, of course, that many of us who sit in this House are familiar with that reality, know people who've taken that solution. And for the last 25 years, Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia has also faced the reality of being part in a new way of the global reality. That began, at least in part, with NAFTA, with the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now involves a whole network of global trade agreements that we need to take stock of. But it's changed the nature of our world. And throughout all this long history, Madam Speaker, of troubles, who, Madam Speaker, has had responsibility for governance in Nova Scotia? All I have to do is look to the other side, Madam Speaker. It's those folks on the other side who've had responsibility for governance in this province. They took turns in allowing Nova Scotia to flounder with old ideas that really favored, in many terms, the privileged few. Some of us on this side of the House, Madam Speaker, will know that Tommy Douglas has a great analogy in which he described that process as one of electing black cats and white cats. You could make a change without getting any change at all. Unless, Madam Speaker, anyone thinks that these troubles are just ancient history or some philosophical idea, the fact is that when we were elected, Madam Speaker, in 2009, Nova Scotia had the worst economic performance of any province in Canada. We'd had that for 20 years. We were left with a fiscal mess that if we hadn't taken charge of, we would have been on a course for a deficit of $1.4 billion. We were left, Madam Speaker, with a roads deficit, speaking a little bit further of rural Nova Scotia, a roads deficit of $4 billion. It would have cost us $4 billion in 2009 to put our roads in reasonable shape. A travesty of neglect, Madam Speaker. That's true. And Madam Speaker, I would suggest we had been living for a very long time in a political climate of steeped in favoritism, which was part of what allowed that road deficit and other problems to occur. And if that wasn't bad enough, Madam Speaker, we were elected at the beginning of one of the worst economic recessions since the Great Depression, something that continues, in fact, to plague not only Nova Scotia, but the whole world. And I suppose, Madam Speaker, we could have been overwhelmed by this history and by the circumstances that we inherited. But the fact is, we were elected to make life better for Nova Scotians, to increase prosperity and growth, and to create good jobs that would help keep our young people at home with work to do and a way to make and build a better life. Well, you know, the question has been asked in this House, Madam Speaker, how's that going? And that's exactly what I want to talk a little bit about.
He's going to explain this to you.
And I won't have enough time, Madam Speaker, to go through all of the things that I could say. But we've been navigating through these difficult economic times by focusing on a number of priorities. We've been putting, Madam Speaker, families first. Thanks to some of the largest budget consultations in history, and using some good common sense, our own, and that we've taken from the advice of Nova Scotians. And our province is now, Madam Speaker, back on balance, back on track to be in balance next year. We've taken funds, Madam Speaker, from school board administrations and duplication, and those funds are being reinvested in Kids and Learning First, a plan that focuses on building better reading and math skills, better learning, and putting extra teachers where they're needed to keep class sizes at a reasonable size. We've seen tens of millions of dollars, Madam Speaker, shifted from healthcare administration into better care sooner. And these include things like the creation of fairer drug prices, more health prevention, and better patient care. And we've done things like begun to announce the openings of community emergency centers, improved dialysis units, and we've created Nova Scotia's first ever mental health and addiction strategy. We've ended, Madam Speaker, March Madness and the frenetic year-end spending that has plagued this province for a very long time. In fact, that's added in the last administration, Madam Speaker, $1 billion to the provincial debt. And you may recall, speaking of debt, Madam Speaker, that in 2010, our government ran a $600 million surplus. And what did we do with that money, Madam Speaker? We put all of it directly on our debt. The first time that that's happened in a very long time, the first one of only 7 times in the history of our province. And we haven't neglected, Madam Speaker, our most deeply held values. And in the face of these difficult economic circumstances, we've continued to think about those whose lives face tough realities. So we've created a new caregiver benefit. We've made the largest ever investment in student aid since the student aid program was first created. And we've been rebating provincial income tax to nearly 20,000 of Nova Scotia's poorest seniors. And I'm only using just a few examples here of how we've been doing things differently. And I realize, Madam Speaker, that I'm clearly running out of time, but I know that as we're doing these things, often it's not so very well understood by the Liberal leader, who has tended to say, you're on the wrong track, you should do something different. But Madam Speaker, the fact is, as I'm speeding through the things that I wanted to say, we're on the threshold, Madam Speaker, so I like to end with a positive note. We're on the threshold, and I haven't had time to talk about all those things, but we're on the threshold of some tremendous opportunities. Some of those involve shipbuilding, some of those involve renewable energy, some of those involve jobs that have come to this province and will come to this province. But of course, there's much that remains to be done. And I think, Madam Speaker, we need to find the courage to go forward. We need to find ways to continue to ignite the confidence of Nova Scotians and the entrepreneurial spirit of our citizens. And we need the help from everybody in this House to do that. We all need to step up to do our part to make things better. We need to ensure that our opportunities are shared fairly.
Recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Madam Speaker, and I'm certainly proud to rise in my place on this late debate topic. Certainly, I disagree with it, and I think it's pretty disingenuous to suggest what's being suggested there, and we will get into the details. And I had to laugh here a few minutes ago because there was a conversation and a topic on the record that highlights exactly what our role is as an opposition side, the official opposition and the PC party. Our job, Madam Speaker, is to ask questions about all deals, all economic development deals, and all things that have to do with tax dollars and the services that we provide as a government and as a province. So when we spoke about the member from Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville spoke about the Churro Hospital, and the fact that it was $80 million cost overrun. And then when the member from Inverness was on his feet, he suggested that, well, you know, the government side, the government members didn't want that. And of course, the member from Truro Bible Hill said, well, yes, I was there and I cut the ribbon. So, right, okay, so she didn't want it to be $80 million over budget. So the government side wanted the hospital, they just didn't want it to be $80 million over budget. That's exactly what we're doing on this side. We're asking those exact questions. That's the point of this. That's why it's so rich. We're asking questions on behalf of taxpayers. $80 million over budget. Well, DSME Trenton was $60 million that we've got nothing for. We haven't produced the 500 jobs that were promised. Where is it going next? $60 million, $1 million per job. So they're the questions we're asking on behalf of taxpayers, and I think it's a little rich that the government on the opposition bill was suggesting that, well, we liked the deal, we just didn't like the terms. That's exactly where we're at with Irving. And that's where we're going to be with all projects, because that's our job. That's our job, and that's what we're here to do. So, Madam Speaker, and again, the mention of young people and that the Liberals' actions would be keeping young people from away is absolutely embarrassing to suggest that that's the case. Young people are leaving all the time, and certainly Cape Breton has felt that as much as anywhere else. So to suggest that our reaction, which I thought this was going to be about Irving Shipbuilding, and it wasn't from the government side, but our reaction was that we're not helping young people is it's kind of frightening that the majority government, by the way, would suggest that. What I think we're here about today, and what this debate and what this motion and this topic represents, is the fact that the government is now desperate, and they realize how lofty these expectations are. Yeah. And Nova Scotians are calling them on the loftiness of the expectations that they created. Here's a government, the majority government, the first-time NDP government, who is now focused, and this session has been a testament to that, has focused on everything that the official opposition's doing. What the leader said, what the leader's doing, what the official opposition did, and what this party did, and what the PC party did in government, 20 years of government. Why not just focus on your own policies? Why not focus on your own mandate? Focus on the things that you promised when you ran, those things that you were on their election brochure and in your materials. That should be the focus of this session, not about what the Liberals are doing. And I can tell you that the shipbuilding, it's sad that anyone would suggest that all of a sudden we're changing the channel and suggesting that the Liberals are not for the Irving Ships contract, just like the Truro Hospital with the government side. Of course we're for the Irving contract. It is a huge, we all celebrated. Every member in this legislature celebrated. I was tweeting from my constituency office. It was October 19th-ish. And I remember tweeting constantly from my constituency office, sitting on the end of my seat saying, please, please, we know that it was based on merit. We know that it wasn't government influence, provincially or federally. At least that's what we were told prior to the announcement being made. Now that message has seemed to change from the government side, but this was going to be based on merit, and Irving was the best for this contract, and they were going to get it, and it was going to be a $25 billion contract for a long time to come. So everyone was excited about this. There was within the confines of our jobs and of our lives, at least it was somewhat nonpartisan in the fact that this was good for everybody, and it wasn't good for Halifax. It was good for Nova Scotia and for the Atlantic region. So we were all united, and the suggestion, Madam Speaker, was that there would be no political interference. And if that's the case, and certainly the Irvings they are an example of those types of industry players and leaders that we talk about, with the jobs they create, with the families they support, with their own investment and their investment of their own profit and their own revenues back into their businesses to keep families here, to support Atlantic Canada, to build the GDP in our province and neighboring provinces. So all those things are important. And the Irving's won this based on merit, and we certainly hear that the change in tune from the government side, because when the Minister of Economic Development gets up and the Premier gets up and they're lost for any specifics on the questions they're being asked, it always goes back to, well, we delivered the ships contract with the $300 million loan. Now, where the Liberals and where the opposition side, I don't want to speak for the PCs, and I'm sure that the member for Cape Breton North will address this, but were we against the $304 million envelope of money that went to the Irvings? Of course not. If that was the investment, and we hear months later that that was the investment and that's what it took to get the ships contract, of course, if you're going to a commercial bank for $300 million, the interest points you're going to get will be different if it's government money. All those things, and you certainly can't go to the federal government, Madam Speaker, asking for a loan when you're competing for a contract that they've tendered. However, this did not have to be forgivable. $25 billion contract secured by Irving, they don't need our $260 million taxpayer dollars. If our play was to secure that $300 million loan, then that's fine. But why did they get to keep it? It's something that I'm not sure if that's, again, the $300 million was important, but I'm not sure that was the deal breaker for Jim Irving. And with all respect to the Irvings, they're a certainly savvy business group, and we're, again, to repeat it, we're happy that they've secured this contract. But the fact that this is repayable to $40 million, and $260 is forgivable, is concerning for us on the opposition side, and I think that's a fair question. And again, given the example that was highlighted by the government members about the Truro Hospital, given what we've seen with Bowater, given what we've seen with Stern, given what we've seen with DSME and Scanwood, and the list goes on, with those things that have happened with tax dollars, I think they've got a right to know, and I think it's certainly fair that we've asked. And I'll say this again for the record, because I want to be absolutely on the record with this one. The projects deal was a subsidizing a Calgary firm that will compete with a thriving industry. The number that they're claiming that they're going to create jobs, if it is in the ballpark of, I think the numbers, give or take 100 jobs per year. That's what the consulting engineering industry puts into the economy now, actually 120 to 150 depending on the year. So that's the growth that sector is enjoying now. So the inflation of the growth that's being provided with this subsidy, it's not a real number, but these guys were growing real numbers and creating real jobs, new jobs in Nova Scotia. So again, when you have a consulting engineering industry with 4,000 strong and 60 businesses and a growing sector, I don't know why we interfered. The only advantage is to the current players. So I know that I've got probably a minute and a half, Madam Speaker, so I'll just wind up with this. This is another example, and again, the reason for this motion was that this government, with their economic development endeavors, have created expectations that they haven't lived up to as of yet. And Nova Scotians hear the ships start here campaign from the government, and they hear about projects, and they hear about that the economies are saved with Bowater and with Stern in those regions. However, where are we now? We haven't created even near the 15,000 jobs that were promised by this government with that $600 million, and we're not seeing that happen. So if the jobs are coming, these 15,000, where are they? If young people, as this motion suggests, are hitting the floodgates to get home, where are they? Who's accepting resumes for young people from Glace Bay and from the North Side and from the South Shore and from Yarmouth that are accepting resumes? Where are they? Because I'm going to call those guys and girls and get them home. So I think the expectation is scary, and that's what the problem is, and that's what I see for Nova Scotians. And it's just like with power rates, Madam Speaker, and taxes and the economy. 2,200 jobs per year was promised by this government. The list goes on. So in closing, this resolution starts that if the Liberals had their way, it would be job guarantees attached to job loans, and we would put all our efforts, or a lot of our efforts, into fostering the business environment and entrepreneurs, Madam Speaker, because it's the entrepreneurs of this province and this nation that grow the economy, make it strong, provide jobs for Nova Scotians, and keep families home. So with that, I'll take my place.
Recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to enter in this lively debate this evening, Madam Speaker. To debate this motion, that therefore be resolved that Nova Scotians could expect far fewer jobs and investments, lower property values, and less opportunity for young people if the Liberals had their way, because Liberals would let Vancouver or Quebec win decades of defence shipbuilding work rather than invest in the ship start here. Well, Madam Speaker, I was fairly newly elected last year when the ship start here slogan was coined, and the NDP government was investing in trying to advertising to try and bring the ship's contract here to Halifax. Well, Madam Speaker, I've seen a lot of backpatting. I've seen a lot of credit being taken for something that we thought was supposed to be an independent process. We were told that no government influence would persuade the contract to be sent to any area. And the Premier, who was at that time being the champion for the Halifax shipyard and the Irving bid, was out front talking about how great this was, that this was coming, and we were doing this and we were doing that. But, Madam Speaker, I watched on breakfast television one morning with great interest when the Premier stood by his federal NDP leader, interim leader at that time, when she was talking about in a television interview that this shipbuilding process was enough that we could make sure there was work for everybody. Madam Speaker, there was an article in the Metro newspaper that said the same thing, and I'll table that article. She said that there's enough for everybody so the government can look at what's best for each province. And that was in the Halifax Herald, Madam Speaker. And who was standing by the NDP leader at that time? Beside the leader on TV, but our present Premier. And what was he doing? Yeah, we agree. So at that time, Madam Speaker, he was trying to say that there's enough work for us to split this work with Vancouver and Quebec, to say that our Irving people, well, maybe we're not going to win the contract. Maybe they didn't think they were the best at the time. But, Madam Speaker, we all knew the Irvings had the best shipbuilding record in the country. We all knew that they were the best company to win this bid. And I was surprised to see that the Premier wouldn't have taken the time then to stand up for Nova Scotia and correct his federal leader. But, Madam Speaker, he didn't. So it begged me to ask the question at that time, at what side was the Premier actually on? When the Irvings came looking, he pretended he was on their side. But when the federal NDP interim leader was here, he was on her side. And we stand over here and we get talked about our federal cousins and how come we don't do this and how come we don't do that. Madam Speaker, he was standing with his federal cousin and trying to tell Nova Scotians that it was okay if we took this contract and split it up. It's okay to take those jobs away from the people, the good people in Nova Scotia. We're hearing about all these people that are coming home. Madam Speaker, there's 16.4% unemployment rate in Cape Breton right now. These people are going out west to work. They're not coming home to work. The shipyard contract is going to provide good work to people in Nova Scotia. But at that time, our Premier was okay if the federal government would divide the contract up like his independent NDP leader at the time did. And we do have to remember that, Madam Speaker, that thanks to this federal government, this was a non-political process, and we were told that. The best bid was won, and the best bid was won by Irving's, plain and simple, because they had the best shipyard to build this contract. But the NDP, by the Premier's expensive advertising spree, and by the federal leader's interference in the process, tried to inject politics. Now, Madam Speaker, I find that shameful, that we have a Premier that wouldn't stand up for our province at that time. Us Nova Scotians and other Nova Scotians were looking to the Premier to stand up for them when their federal leader made so much counterproductive comments. The Premier should have told his colleague at that time to stay out of what was supposed to be an independent process. We know, and every person in this province knows, and every person in this legislature knows, that we have the best shipbuilders in the country. We've proven that. Irving Shipyard won this contract fair and square, and there was no political interference to make Irving's win this contract. We know this government doesn't know how to create jobs. Now we've seen with that, he didn't want to defend them either. Nova Scotia shipbuilders won this contract fair and square, and they should be thanked for that, and I thank them for that, and every Nova Scotia thanks them for that. The federal NDP leader called on us to ignore merit in the process. She wanted us to spread the contract around regardless of the merit. And I seen the Premier that morning on breakfast television nodding his head yes. I read the papers that day, and he was agreeing with the federal NDP leader. Madam Speaker, that's not a premier we need standing up for our people. Our premier has to be there to tell that federal NDP leader that we had the best shipbuilders in the province. We had the best shipbuilders in the country. And there's no one going to come in here and take that from us if everything was going to be done on merit like we know it was. By coming here, the federal NDP leader trying to politicize the bid, they put this risk at bid for Nova Scotians. And I think that was intentional, so that bid could go to her hometown or her home province of Quebec. But it didn't work. Time after time after time, the federal government said the decision would be made on merit, and it was made on merit alone. But our premier, he didn't seem to want to listen. He went on with the advertising plan, and we were told that this advertising plan could put this contract in jeopardy. Yeah, an advertising plan, we were told, and we found out afterwards it wasn't tendered.
A non-tendered advertising contract.
Premiers who really have the province's best interests at heart will put politics aside and stand up to their party when it's time. How shameful, Madam Speaker, that we had the Premier try to take credit for this whole process, for the accomplishment of the good men and women who work at the Irving shipyard, for the Irvings for maintaining that shipyard in tough times. And we've seen the federal party trying to ruin the deal. We know that if the federal NDP leader had gotten their way, party of the shipbuilding contract would have gone to Quebec, where the NDP have 59 MPs, which begs us to think that there will be 59 reasons for this NDP leader to want those ships to be built in that province. The approach to shipbuilding deal, federally and provincially, represented the worst kind of old school politics. He had an opportunity to clarify that the bid should be free of politics and to make sure that the politics stayed out of this bid so that the good people of the province of Nova Scotia, when it came to shipbuilding, would prove to the rest of this country that we have the best shipbuilders. And we realize on this side of the House what this contract is going to bring to the province of Nova Scotia. We hope it brings numerous jobs, good, well-paying jobs for people who live here, pay taxes here, spend their money here. But if the federal NDP leader had their way, that wouldn't have happened. We would have had half of that. I know my time is getting short, Madam Speaker, but I do want to say that when it comes to the federal shipbuilding contract, we know the good people of Halifax, we know the good people of Nova Scotia, we know the good people that work at the Irving Shipbuilding have won this contract on merit. And this contract will be good for our province. And if we keep going ahead with this, keep the process free of politics, they should be here for a long time providing good, stable jobs in our province. With that, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all members for a very civil debate. We will now rise and to meet again tomorrow at 12 noon. We're adjourned.